Hi. So, I've never made a guitar review before, but I play in a band and I'm a massive gear nerd, and I've always wanted to do a guitar review just to see how it would go. And I figured this would be a better guitar to talk about than any other because I've got my favorite guitar model of all time right here. So this is a 2024 Fender Cyclone, part of the limited edition run that they recently did out of Japan. I imported this from Japan using a service called MIJ. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but I really love what they do. Basically, MIJ allows you to shop on online Japanese marketplaces and get Japan-exclusive items from Japan to your home. And the idea is that you bulk buy a ton of stuff, and then once it all arrives at the MIJ warehouse, they'll pack it all in one box, which saves you money on shipping. And you can also just use it to buy single items, which of course is what I did here. Now the reason I went with MIJ instead of buying directly from Fender Japan or going through one of those eBay brokers is because Fender Japan actually doesn't ship models meant for the domestic market outside of Japan. And while Japanese brokers basically do exactly what MIJ does, there's usually an upcharge for their service that can vary from $100 to several $100s depending on who you go with. MIJ is the cheapest option as far as I could find. So after a 2-day wait for this guitar to arrive at the MIJ warehouse, and then after about 6 days in transit, this guitar arrived safe and sound at my doorstep, and I've had it for about 2 weeks now. I will say, the packaging that MIJ provided was excellent. There was an excessive amount of bubble wrap, which ensured that this thing arrived with no issues at all. There actually aren't even any neck pocket finish cracks. It arrived perfectly. So due to a disturbing absence of Fender Cyclone deep dives on the internet, I wanted to offer a deep dive of my own for any prospective buyers or for any fellow Cyclone aficionados. So just a little bit of backstory as to why I went and bought this. The lead guitarist of one of my favorite bands used Mexican-made Fender Cyclones live, and he was the entire reason I even got serious about playing guitar to begin with. And I fell in love with the Cyclones that he used on stage, which is how I fell in love with the model, and soon enough it actually became my favorite guitar model of all time. I'm still going after a 2005 Caramel Metallic Cyclone, which was his guitar of choice live, and probably his favorite guitar if I had to guess. But those are incredibly rare, and so what I actually ended up doing was building my own version of one of those while I was at trade school, which I have right here. So the Fender Cyclone is kind of a forgotten sleeper model that Fender really pushed hard for about 10 years before they discontinued them after they realized that hardly anybody really wanted them. But the model has always had a cult following, and recently they've been appreciating in value on the used market. So it seems like they're starting to get the recognition that they deserve, and obviously with this new Fender Japan release, that's obviously going to put a lot more eyes on the model too, which I'm happy about. I'm a fan of dark fingerboards and opaque finishes, and plus I really wanted a red guitar, so I opted for the Fiesta Red option here. This particular run also comes in Sunburst and Lake Placid Blue, and for the first time ever you can now get Cyclones with maple fingerboards if you buy the white blonde or butterscotch blonde options. The butterscotch blonde option with a black pickguard and a maple neck is obviously very Telecaster-y, and it's only available in person at the Fender flagship store in Tokyo. You can't buy these online, at least not brand new. As for my first impressions with this Cyclone, I took several notes when I got it and when I plugged it in for the first time. Quality-wise, this is hands down the nicest guitar I've ever owned, which I kind of expected for a guitar from Japan based on what I've heard. The fit and finish, the setup, everything straight out of the box was brilliant. I tuned it up and played a little, and it was perfect. So the vibrato here was set up from the factory to be floating, meaning you could both push it down and pull it up. I usually abuse vibratos, and I find that having them floating really messes with my tuning stability, so I tightened that up to where it was level with the body. But here's a few pictures of how it looked from the factory, and here's how it looked after I set the bridge to my liking. Now these do come with gig bags, which is kind of a bummer for something that costs nearly $1,000 US. But if you want to get nitpicky, the original Mexican Cyclones also came in big bags, so hey, bonus points for historical accuracy, right? The gig bag itself isn't anything to write home about. In fact, I have another gig bag here from like 2008, which is virtually identical in design. But it does its job, but if you want some real deal protection, you'll probably want a hard case. We've also got some case candy. You get this little booklet here, a little hang tag telling you about Proposition 65 warnings, Allen keys for adjusting your truss rod and your bridge saddles, your vibrato arm, and your warranty card. So pretty standard stuff, I would say. So a crash course in Cyclone history. The Cyclone originally came out as a Mexican-made model in 1996, and if I had to guess, I would say that Fender based them off of Kurt Cobain's modified Mustangs that he used during the In Utero tour in 1993 and 94. I mean, simplified controls, simplified bridge, high output humbucker in the bridge position. That sounds pretty curt to me. I'm not quoting anyone here. This is just some speculation on my part as a pretty big Nirvana fan. Fender also started to make USA Cyclones around 2000, and they had these 2 noiseless single coils and a 2-point vibrato. Some of them even got matching headstocks. The Mexican line also got Cyclones with 2 humbuckers around the same time, adding a Fender Santa Ana humbucker to the neck position. Around 2003, Squier started making Cyclones too under their vintage modified line, and I actually have one from 2012 that I've upgraded to Mexican Fender specs here. In 2003, Fender introduced the Cyclone 2, which redid the pickup configuration. Now it had 3 Jaguar pickups and 3 on-off switches to control each one, so it was basically a more versatile Strat. At some point, Fender also produced a few Showmaster Cyclones out of South Korea with set necks, carved Bubinka tops, Seymour Duncan pickups, and matching headstocks. If you want to talk about unobtainium in the Fender Cyclone world, this is it, as there is hardly any info about these guys online. Fender discontinued all the Fender branded Cyclones after 2006, and the Squier Vintage Modifieds were discontinued after 2014. Fender then revived the Cyclone under the Squier Paranormal line in 2020, which was basically a Cyclone 2 with Strat pickups, so it was almost like the old Fender Cyclone 2, but not quite. And I do believe they're still in production to this day. Just as a side tangent, around 2003, the Fender Custom Shop made a one-off Cyclone for Tom DeLonge of Blink-182, which actually sold at the Tom DeLegacy auction in 2015 for $3,000. It's a pretty standard USA Cyclone aside from the Stratocaster knobs, the single Seymour Duncan Invader pickup, the lack of a switching system. It's got this really interesting competition stripe, along with these cool inlays on the neck. I'm not a Blink fan, so I'm not sure what they signify, but I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. Interestingly, this guitar also comes with a tone control, which Tom usually leaves off of his guitars. In 2013, Squier did a production run of signature Cyclones from the Japanese band The Pillows. It was a Japan exclusive model that's based on the vintage modified Cyclones, and they had this really cool black and white design that extended onto the pickguard and all over the guitar, even on the back of the neck. And it utilized a Mustang-style 3-way slider switch for the pickups instead of the 3-way toggle switch. And then we come to late May of 2024 when Fender Japan came out with these. They're basically reissues of the old Mexican models being produced in limited quantities for this year only. So now I want to go all Trogly's Guitar Show on you and bring you over to my workbench to have a detailed look at everything that makes this guitar tick, as well as compare it to my Mexican spec Squier. Now of course keep in mind that while I am comparing this actual Fender to what is just an up-badged Squier, this isn't meant to be like something super serious. This is just like kind of a fun thing just to see how they did with matching the electronics, because that's the main thing we're going to be looking at here. So let's dive in. So here's what we're rocking pickups wise. On the original Mexican Cyclones, your bridge pickup is the Atomic Humbucker, which looks like this. You got this little Fender logo here. Fender also put these pickups in their Toronados, except those were covered and these are uncovered. You have this reverse zebra design with the bobbin closest to the bridge being black and the other bobbin being white. And you have 2 adjustment screws on the bass side here. I have tape over the adjustment screws on my Squier here due to some weird grounding issue that I can't figure out, which I've heard can be a problem on genuine Mexican models. But I'm happy to report that you don't get any buzzing with the reissue. On the reissue you have what they're just calling the Made in Japan Cyclone humbucking pickup. You can certainly see some differences between the two. You could tell this one is 4-conductor, and you might think that this is just 2-conductor, but if you come down here, you will see that there are 2 extra leads that are just taped off. So coil splitting is an option with this. Otherwise, it looks identical from the outside, aside from just having 1 adjustment screw on each side. As for the neck pickup on the originals, you had Fender Tex-Mex single coils, which you can still buy brand new to this day. These are just overwound Stratocaster pickups that can compete with the high output of the humbucker. On the reissue, you have something different, what they're calling the Made in Japan Cyclone single coil, which looks pretty close to the Tex-Mex. There are a few differences here, mainly coming down to how the actual bobbin looks. This one looks a little melty, this one looks cleaner. That just probably has something to do with the manufacturing process. So Fender Japan says that these pickups were developed specifically for this guitar, so I'll plug it in for you in a bit so you can hear how they sound, and then I'll shoot them out against the Mexican Cyclone pickups. Both of the Japanese pickups had protective plastic on them when I got the guitar. And here's what that looked like. You've got a 3-way toggle, and not only is it one of these higher quality leaf switches, it's actually an L style, more akin to what you'd find on a Jazzmaster or an SG. And here's your pots and your output jack on the reissue. It looks like you're rocking 250K pots. We have these Mustang style knobs, and they set with a set screw, just like the original Mexican models. And the pickguard itself is just this 3-ply white, black, white material. Pretty standard stuff, nothing to write home about. Also take note that the toggle switch secures with this little hex washer. And here's the bridge, which is just a standard vintage-style Stratocaster vibrato. And please remember, these are called vibratos, not tremolos. This is the hill I will die on. If you come back from this video with nothing else, remember that these are called vibratos. The body itself is made of alder, which is actually different from the original Mexican models, which were made from poplar. You've got a swimming pool route here, just like the original Mexican models, so if you wanted to throw in some P90s or run 3 humbuckers, then you definitely could. The body is shaped like a Mustang, but if you look, it's actually 1/4 of an inch thicker than a standard Mustang body. I have a Fender Duosonic, which is the closest thing I have to a Mustang, and you can see the depth difference here. More than likely, that's just to accommodate the Stratocaster vibrato. So, moving on to the neck, we find some more surprises. Fender usually uses 25.5-inch scales for most of their models, and most of their offset models have a shorter 24-inch scale. This is in the middle, measuring at 24.75 of an inch, which is actually the standard scaling for Gibson guitars. So it lands somewhere in between the middle of Fender's offerings when it comes to scaling. So that's pretty cool. And yes, every other version of the Cyclone also has this reduced scaling. You've got 22 medium jumbo frets, which is kind of the industry standard for Fenders. Nothing too surprising here. And of course you've got a nice, dark Indian rosewood fingerboard here. No Pau Ferro, no Indian Laurel. This is the real deal, just like the originals. I personally don't mind alternate woods. In fact, I've come to really appreciate Indian Laurel. But if I have the opportunity to get rosewood, then that's always nice, and I'll always jump on that. Moving up, you have a bone nut, and these come stock from the factory with 9 to 42 gauge strings. Now for QC, I didn't notice this before, and it's not even coming through on the camera, but there is this weird bubbling by the nut on the bass side. I don't know what that's about, maybe some finish buildup or something, but for me as a player and someone who's going to be playing tons of shows with this, I don't mind it. But if you're a collector, then maybe that's something for you to look out for on yours. But I'm sure mine is just an anomaly. And now we move on to the headstock, which according to this old advertisement is a Jazzmaster shape. And as far as I can tell, this is true on every Cyclone iteration. It's finished over in satin, which is true to the original Mexican models. You've got a single string tree, and vintage style tuners here. These are my favorite types of tuners, where you poke them down the middle. Sometimes these are called safety posts, because you don't get any sharp string ends poking out, so that's a pretty good reason to like them. And plus, if you're like me who leaves strings on your guitars for a pretty long time, you can just loosen the tuning peg and take the entire string out, and then when you're done, you can just put it right back in. Here's your Fender Cyclone logo with the Made in Japan text underneath. I really like that they include that, because on the Mexican models, they had that on the face of the headstock as well. They just said Made in Mexico. The Fender logo itself is kind of in this sort of like light gold silvery color, and finally on the end of the headstock here you get your little Cyclone logo. I believe the only model that you don't get this guy on are the Paranormal Cyclones and the Showmaster Cyclones. I actually managed to get my hands on some of these old promotional Cyclone stickers, as well as this Cyclone Frisbee, so you can see the logo in much better detail. I've always thought it was kind of funny how the guitar that he's holding is actually more akin to a Stratocaster shape than the Cyclone shape. Flipping the guitar over, we've got a little bit more to talk about. You've got a single ply white cover for your vibrato cavity, and I still haven't taken the protective plastic off. I think I'll do that now. Like I showed you before, this guitar comes stock from the factory with 3 springs, and here's how I have it set up right now. It's not floating, but you get plenty of downward action. You've got a standard 4-bolt neck plate, and then here's the back side of the neck, which is a modern C profile and is finished in satin. I always prefer glossy necks, and that's probably because I've never had issues with my hands getting sweaty and sticking to glossy necks. Luckily this can buff out to a semi-gloss after I play it enough. As far as I can tell, the original Cyclones also came with satin necks, so bonus points for accuracy. And then on the back of the headstock, here's the back side of the tuners. You've also got your serial number and Made in Japan stamp here. I've blocked out the serial number here just because I've seen some American reviewers do that to protect the identity of the Japanese shops that these come from. So I'm doing it too, just in case. So I've put it back together, and now I'm going to shoot it out with my Squier Cyclone here. Yeah, it's not a Mexican Cyclone, but it does have the Mexican pickups in it, so hopefully it'll be a good comparison. I will say that the middle position on the Squire is wired out of phase, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out how to wire it up to where it's in phase, which I've been trying to do for literal years. So for the middle position shootout, I'm going to be using my Cyclone Tribute build, which has a 24.5-inch scale, a Tex-Mex, and a Seymour Duncan JB, which is pretty similar to the Atomic Humbucker, but not exact. Hopefully you don't mind, but if you do, sorry, but if anyone wants to give me their 2006 Caramel Metallic Cyclone, then I'll redo the shootout using that. Now keep in mind, I do live in an apartment and I need to have my amp turned way down, but hopefully this will be good enough. I'm sorry if it's not good enough. Hi, it's the next day. I put up a new poster. Do you like it? You probably can't see it. Can you see it? So I hope that demo helped to paint a good picture of how this guitar sounds when compared to what it was going up against. Naturally, there are more noticeable differences between the original and the reissue with the clean tones. Immediately I could tell that the original definitely has higher output pickups than the reissue. I sadly can't provide any accurate pickup readings because my multimeter is sort of broken, but it did give me enough info to tell me that the pickups on the reissue are lower output than the ones on the original. So that does help explain a lot of the differences that I was hearing. When I kicked the distortion on, I thought the middle and the neck positions sounded fairly similar, but the bridge on the reissue definitely sounds more dynamic to me, and of course has less drive than the original. But I think I actually prefer these to the original, which I was sort of surprised by, given how I have 3 guitars with Seymour Duncan JBs in them. The bridge pickup on the original usually gets lost in the live mix with my band, but the reissue really cuts through, at least from my experiences so far at rehearsals. I've heard stories about Fender Japan cheaping out on pickups, but I really liked how these sounded. So at the end of the day, my final thoughts on this guitar is that, even after putting my personal love for Cyclones aside, Fender Japan definitely crafted an excellent guitar that sounds and plays just as great as it looks. I definitely plan on taking this on the road with me later this month, and I see it being a staple in my live arsenal. Overall, the only thing that I was really disappointed about with this guitar was the satin headstock. I get it, people like satin, I'm not one of those people, but the thing is, even with the back of the neck is satin, and Fender usually finishes the face of the headstock in gloss, like on my Duosonic, so that was a little disappointing. But again, the full satin neck is an original Mexican spec, so it is what it is. As far as historical accuracy, the only things that aren't the same as far as I can tell are the nut style for the toggle switch and the pickups. Though it's clear Fender Japan put in the work to create an excellent sounding guitar. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've never done a guitar review before, and I don't really know how often I'll do them considering I don't buy many guitars anymore. And pretty much all my other guitars are modded to hell and back, so you wouldn't be getting any reviews of stock guitars. But if you are interested in hearing me yap about my axes, then do let me know. And I've also heard rumors that the frontman for my favorite band, Tiger Cub, is going to be getting a signature model from Chapman. So if that happens, then I'll probably end up reviewing that one too. Until next time, I hope you have a good day. Drive safe.